the man who remembered their faces. For more than 40 years, he was invisible. Not because he hid in the shadows, but because the world never bothered to look. He moved from city to city like smoke, leaving behind broken bodies and unanswered questions. He left no calling cards, no cryptic notes, no twisted trophies. Just silence. Just names that disappeared before they were ever spoken. They were women who lived hard lives. Lives on the margins. Women who weren't missed by the evening news, who didn't make front pages. Some were mothers. Some were daughters. Some were never even reported missing. And in the end, for many, their names were never known at all. And yet, the man who killed them remembered every single one. Samuel Little, a drifter, a failed boxer, a lifelong criminal, would become the most prolific serial killer in American history. He claimed to have murdered 93 women between 1970 and 2005. And decades later, he recalled them not with guilt, but with precision. He sketched their faces from memory. He described their final moments like diary entries, never forgetting the cars they drove, the colors they wore, or how their bodies went still beneath his hands. How did he evade justice for so long? Because he knew the truth, that some lives are seen as disposable. And if you choose your victims right, if no one is looking, then the devil can dance in plain sight. This is the story of the women who were lost and the man who never forgot them. This is the story of Samuel Little. Part 1, Roots of a Drifter. Samuel Little was born on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia. His birth, like much of his life, came in the shadows. His mother, reportedly a teenage sex worker, abandoned him. Raised by his grandmother in Lorain, Ohio, Little's early years were marked by instability, rejection, and violence. He struggled with literacy, dropped out of school, and began his long dance with the law before he turned 16. By the early 1960s, he was already drifting, riding greyhounds, sleeping in cars, committing petty crimes just to survive. He had no permanent address. He had no steady job. What he did have was a growing obsession with control and a violent, compulsive rage. At 6'3" and 220 pounds, Little had the build of a heavyweight boxer, and for a time, he was one. He fought in amateur circuits, never quite going professional, but learning how to knock someone unconscious with a single blow. That skill, combined with his methodical, hands-on approach, would define his signature in the decades to come. Little's record as early as the 1970s was already lengthy: shoplifting, assault, fraud, DUI, attempted rape. He was arrested nearly 100 times in his lifetime, booked in over 24 states, and yet never convicted of murder until he was 72 years old. But the killings had already begun. Part 2, The Invisible Slaughter. Between 1970 and 2005, Little crisscrossed the United States in a nomadic killing spree, targeting women society barely noticed. Many were poor, Black, sex workers, drug users, or homeless, people the system had already discarded. His method was chilling in its intimacy: strangulation, often after beating the victim into unconsciousness. He used his bare hands or improvised ligatures, his belt, shoelaces, a cord ripped from a hotel curtain. He didn't use guns or knives. There was rarely blood, rarely a crime scene. Often, no one noticed the victim was gone until it was too late. He would lure his victims into his car, offering drugs, a ride, or a sense of safety. He used charm as a weapon, luring them in with a disarming smile. Then he'd drive to a secluded area, an alleyway, a field, the outskirts of town, and strike. Once the life left their bodies, he would sometimes position them, almost tenderly, and walk away as if nothing had happened. He never stayed long in one place. He left bodies in Florida, Georgia, Texas, Ohio, Mississippi, California, Arizona, Nevada, Louisiana, and beyond. He vanished before the bodies were found. Police departments failed to connect the cases, and the victims were often labeled overdose, natural causes, or unknown. One detective would later say he chose victims he knew the system wouldn't fight for. And he was right. Part 3, The System's Blind Spots. Samuel Little wasn't just lucky. He understood how America worked, or rather how it didn't. He understood that poor Black women were rarely seen as priority cases. He understood that disconnected police departments wouldn't compare notes. And he understood that serial killers were expected to have a pattern, one that could be profiled. But Little defied those expectations. He didn't stalk one city. He didn't use a signature weapon. He didn't leave notes, trophies, or taunts. His only pattern was his victims. and they were people society often ignored. He was arrested for homicide multiple times in the 1980s and 1990s, in Florida, in Mississippi, and in California. But each time, the case fell apart. Witnesses were afraid. Evidence was weak. Juries were unconvinced. And so he walked. In 1984, a woman in San Diego survived. She identified Little after he nearly strangled her to death and left her for dead. He was convicted of assault and false imprisonment and served 2 years. 2 years. When he got out, he vanished, and the killings resumed. It wasn't until 2012 when a routine DNA sample from a minor drug arrest in Kentucky linked him to 3 unsolved murders in Los Angeles that justice finally caught up. By then, he was 72. Old, sick, and seemingly harmless. But the truth was still buried inside him. Part 4. Memory of a Monster. In 2018, investigators visited Little in prison. They weren't sure he'd talk, but to their astonishment, he was eager. What followed was a confession that would stun even the most hardened law enforcement officials. He confessed to 93 murders. But it wasn't just the number, it was the detail. He remembered faces, names, hairstyles, cars. He could recall what street they were on, what they were wearing, and how their bodies fell. He sketched his victims from memory, portraits so hauntingly accurate that years later, families recognized their missing daughters, sisters, and mothers. The FBI and Texas Rangers launched a national effort, reopening cold cases, matching his drawings to missing person reports, pulling DNA and fingerprints from forgotten evidence boxes. Over 60 cases have been confirmed. Dozens more are still under investigation. Little had an almost savant-like ability to remember every killing. He described it not with guilt, but with ownership. It wasn't remorse. It was legacy. He said he killed gently, that he didn't mean to hurt them, that some wanted to die. But these were lies told with the same charisma that once got him into cars and out of courtrooms. He died on December 30th, 2020 in a California prison. He never expressed regret, but he left behind a ledger of pain, drawn in memory, in pencil, and in blood. Thank you for listening to this story. It is a story not just of evil, but of erasure, of how a man killed with impunity, not because he was clever, but because his victims were invisible, because no one thought to look for them. Samuel Little didn't just slip through the cracks were wide open, and the system looked the other way. His drawings now hang on FBI walls. His memories have become clues, but for many families, the only justice they'll ever know is a confession whispered too late and a name scribbled beneath a face drawn by the killer himself. We remember the victims not because they were once forgotten, but because now we refuse to forget, because silence is what let him kill. And stories, real stories, are what will keep it from happening again.